Hi. Welcome to 2016. Yes. Made it to the future. This morning I want to do, every once in a while I do this. I try to do it around this time, but sometimes it comes more around AGM time, which is in April. But I want to kind of do a state of the church this morning. And if you're visiting with us, that might be a little bit awkward, but I want to just talk about where we've been this year and what our call is and where we're supposed to be next year and hopefully, or this year, and hopefully we can all get something out of that still. Just before we begin, I think it's important to note that this is the smallest group we've had all year. It sinks in slowly, but no, really, we've been up and down in numbers, and that's totally okay. We can come and go, and we have people move, and we have people we have new blood come in and help out with things for a season, and that's okay. That's part of being a community and serving your neighborhood, which reflects the same thing, right? People come into a neighborhood and go. I've had, 4 different neighbors next to me in our almost 5 years, and that's just part of life, and that's okay. But there is something to be said for us being aware of that. Us being aware of that we are, 1, continually growing, and 2, continually not. Those are 2 things that are happening here. And I think it's part of something that we're missing out in some ways. I think we're missing a certain amount of connections, and things that we can do to address that is work on building those connections and building relationships, and focused on being relational and being part of each other's lives and supporting one another when things are tough. That's what makes things difficult. When I got here, we had 20 showing up on Sunday morning. That's the pastor's count, which means not really 20, but maybe bolstered by 20 with a few infants around that day or something like that. And I read a lot on what do you need to do to make a church grow, and how do we move forward from here? Do you know what the number 1 way a church grows? Anyone?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth? Yeah, a little more specific than word of mouth. It's a friend or a family member. You bring a friend. And I'm looking around at a church that had been running for a few years and with maybe 15 adults showing when I got here and going, family and friends. This is going to take a while. But that's not the case anymore. One week we had somebody show up and he said, I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." And he said, "Oh, yeah, good to meet you too." And I said, "How'd you hear about us?" I always ask you. If I haven't yet, I will. "How'd you hear about us?" "Oh, this lady told me about you." And he starts looking around. She's about this tall, and this. And he starts describing her, and she's not there. And he was back the next week, and she wasn't there again. And she hasn't been here in a long time. We still talk to her and stuff like that. But the point is, that moment, that interaction at a coffee shop, which is really what it was, when she said, "I've been checking out this place," created a substantial investment in Open Door. And it's not just Open Door. That's the thing. It's an investment in relationships. It's an investment in, we like to say sometimes, expanding God's kingdom. And some of us are uncomfortable with that term, and some of us aren't sure what it means. But the reality is it means sharing God's love with others. That's what we put up here, exploring God's love. And it's about taking what you know to be true about God, what you experience with God, what you experience in relationship with others and get to know God. It's about taking that into different places in your life and seeing what it will do when you really let it take over. When you go explore, you go seek depth into an area, into a space, into a place. Maybe you're exploring art. Maybe you're exploring a Golden Ears Mountain. Maybe you're exploring a new river. But whatever it is, you go and you search deeper. And then when you get back, you share about that with everyone. And you show them your 500 pictures and they get bored. But you do it anyway because you can't stop. That's what exploring God's love is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about us digging so deep into it that we don't know what else to talk about because everything is about God's love. And everywhere we go, we see God's love happening and we experience it in different ways. That's what we're working toward here. And some days I feel like that's not fair. This isn't a fair statement. But some days I'm certain that some of you feel like we're here for this few minutes right here in this room to have worship and to sort of go through the motion of church. And church isn't about that. Church is about exploring God and getting to know God personally and then being so overwhelmed with God's love that we have to share that everywhere we go. In small ways, in big ways, in a helping hand, in different possibilities and opportunities. And that's what the new year brings, right? Is new places, new spaces, new peoples. We, in some ways, we've worked to cement our identity as a church. Newness is hard. Have you tried to come up with something new before? If you look back through history at new ideas, big ideas, things that change the world, you'll see small moments of people that make a big difference. But you'll see it happen. This is what's crazy about this, is that we like to talk about a big idea, say the computer, or say the printing press or something like that truly changes how the world operates. We like to think about these ideas as these revelationary moments where somebody experiences something and gets an idea in their head and all of a sudden this idea begins to come to fruition. But most big ideas, I've been reading a lot about this, it's coming more detail later, trust me. But most big ideas take years to develop. In fact, if you talk to someone that has been responsible for something new introduced to humanity, they will often tell you about how they had this idea when they were a teenager or when they were 20. And it sort of bounced around in their head and it connected with other ideas and it sort of grew over time. And then at 60 or 65 or 70, that idea comes back to intersect with something else. And that's the moment that this begins to change the world because it couldn't be used or they didn't have the fullness of the thought. We are working, don't get scared here, we are working on something new here at Open Door. The purpose and our drive is to provide an opportunity for people to experience God, to explore God in a different way than has been experienced through most churches. Part of that is seeing what is working around the world. Part of that is recognizing that we live in a different culture, in a different place in time, and that our church shouldn't look like it did 200 years ago. And part of that is reading the scriptures and finding Jesus' heart, and finding God's love, and truly trying to interpret that without all of the religion around it. We've all heard of either ourselves or somebody else trying to remove religion from faith. And the reason we're doing that is because religion has built up traditions and different pieces of practice that prevent us from getting to the heart of things. You see, Jesus did something new, completely new. And it wasn't because the ideas were so different than others. It wasn't because there were things missing from Judaism. Jesus began interpreting and understanding Scripture in the ways that they were intended to. And so when Jesus looks out into the world, he sees all the places where God's heart had always... We're going to talk about Jesus as person right now, and don't get overly worried about that. But all of the things that God had done in history, Jesus saw as caring for those who are marginalized, caring for those who are on the fritz, caring for those who are struggling and fighting for life and fighting for dignity and life. Jesus saw that and took it deeper, explored that in new ways, touching people that he wasn't supposed to touch, giving dignity to people that weren't supposed to get dignity in that society, loving on people, caring for people. And the early church took that and ran with it. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. Scholars talk about the spread of the early church. This is one of my favorite things. If you haven't heard it from me before, you will today, and then you'll hear it again later, because I love this. And it's completely secular. It's not even from a faith perspective. But scholars like to talk about the early church and why it grew so quickly. And what they're trying to do is attempt to explain how this thing could have happened. But what they're actually doing is explaining how God's love actually works. They talk about the early church and the difference between the early church and other clubs and organizations that were around in the Greco-Roman world. And what the early church did was took Jesus' words, they took Jesus' actions, and they ran with it. And they said, we're going to love people that are sick. We're going to take care of them. We're going to find people jobs that need jobs. We are going to feed people that need to be fed. We are going to accept people in that others don't accept in. And instead of concerned about power, we're going to be concerned about others. Scholars believe that people that were connected to the early church actually lived longer because the care for them was greater and more intense. They had better chance of survival through sickness. They had a better chance of survival through harsh times. Now that's supposed to tell you, well, this is why the church grew and stuff like that. But what's it really saying? It's really saying this is what God's love looks like. This is who we can follow. This is who we can mimic. And this is who we can be. But somewhere along the way, church or Christianity transitioned. And it transitioned to something about our head, about ideas, about... And I'm going to use a sensitive word here, about our beliefs. And the reason that's sensitive is because we have said for a couple of centuries, several centuries, that it's about what you believe. Not what you do, not what you practice, not how you live out God's love. And that what we believe piece has become so core and so central to everything that we do that we have forgotten, and that's the religion piece, that we put doctrine, we put ideas. I mean, we got in, I'm like dancing around landmines here because we're talking about Jesus as a person, and I ignored Jesus as Son of God and the Trinity. These are the landmines that we're living around in trying to explain faith without the religion. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. And instead of caring for people, we started talking about caring for souls, or expanding God's kingdom, or other terms that indicate that we're not so much caring for people, but we're caring for their afterlife. And there's a fine line there, and I don't really want to get into that. What I want to get into is that we lost the piece where we follow what Jesus did, where we follow what Jesus said, where we follow where Jesus went, which was everywhere, in everyone's household, saint or sinner, letting people in that didn't belong in. Even looking at the disciples and the makeup of the disciples, you see Jesus expanding God's love through how people came in. That's what we're trying to do here. We're not really trying to do something new per se. We're trying to bring that to reality. But there's pockets of churches around that are attempting to re-engage this process, and we want to learn from them. We want to be part of that movement of making this about exploring God's love. So that's what we're looking for in 2016. We had some, and in some ways we have that. In some ways, as you come in, we talk about why you come. You and I talk about why you come here and why you keep coming back, and what brought interest. And sometimes it's, I saw this thing on homelessness and I thought, that's a church I'd like to be at. Sometimes it's, you were doing stuff in the community and I haven't seen that before, and so I just wanted to be involved somewhere, and here's where I am. In some sense, we've sort of cemented our commitment to our community in those ways. In other senses, we have to step that up and live it out. A few events a year don't really make our commitment worthwhile if we're not living it out in the everyday, if we're not serving our neighbor and continuing that process and continuing those opportunities to say, let me tell you about God's love. Or better, let me show you what that looks like, right? So last year we had a huge Easter event. I don't know, some 400 plus people showed up to this tiny park back here, and it was awesome. In fact, it was so awesome we have to reorganize it this year because we never can keep up with the growth of that event. We had a couple of movie nights that went really well. We've divvied out a huge number of blessing bags. We had a couple of plays for our community right here on this stage that I'm actually quite proud of, and I'll tell you why. Because most churches couldn't partner with Emerald Pig, but they see something different here. And so they're willing to partner with us and come here and do their play and call us their home and stuff like that. I was in a community meeting a few months ago, and the arts director at the ACT, there's some 30 or 40 people there, all representing different organizations. And at the end of the meeting, the arts director at the ACT said, "Hey, I just want to say something about Open Door." Well, this is interesting. I just want to thank them for their commitment to the arts that has been shown over the last bit, and that it's really great for our community. What a huge statement. Right here in the midst of all of these organizations doing truly amazing things, and she felt the need to speak up and say something about the work that we're doing here. And it's small things. We have an opportunity to do big things, And that's what I want to talk about for 2016. As we press forward, I want us to continue to think about our commitment to our community and how we can sustain that. So we started working on homelessness, and we did a lot of cool stuff. We delivered food. We were sending people almost weekly to go and visit the homeless camp. The homeless camp is gone. Homeless people are not. We still have an opportunity to be committed to those people. Everywhere Jesus went, he was caring for someone that didn't have someone else to speak up for them. Maybe it was somebody hurting on the side of the road. Maybe it was somebody who had been in a bad place. But everywhere, Jesus was answering to people that needed help, that no one else was willing to help. And we have the same call. And we have the same place to be as we move forward in 2016. And so I want to continue to talk about homelessness. We have a rising need in our community in terms of refugees. And I want to talk about how can we sponsor or co-sponsor a refugee family to make a difference in someone's lives. These are things, big things that we can do that I believe we have collectively committed to serving in different ways, and it's time to step up. At the end of the day, 2016 brings a lot of excitement. And as we continue to grow, and yes, we'll also continue to not grow in some ways too, we have an opportunity to represent Jesus in new ways. And that's the newness piece. And it takes time for us to do that, and for people to respond differently to us, and to see that Jesus can be represented in different ways. We have that here. And so 2016 gives us new opportunities to do that. And I ask for you to remember that commitment and to support us in different ways. Not support, I say us, but I mean one another. Support one another. Because you come to me with ideas and you say, how about the refugee situation? Can we do anything for that? Yeah, we could do this or that. Or you say, I'd like to do this for the refugees, or I'd like to do this for the homelessness situation. You come to me with those ideas. And so what we need to be doing is pooling our resources to say, we as a community can address these things. And in the process, explore God's love in new and exciting ways, and share that, because it overwhelms us that we have to share this new love that we've seen happening in our community, in our lives, in our relationships, everywhere we go.